Hey, everybody. That's loud. Hi. Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Please feel free to keep eating. And there's dessert and more to drink and stuff. Feel free to help yourself. But we're going to go ahead and get started because I can drone on. And I want you to get home before dark. All right. Hi, everybody. This seems really loud. Is it really loud? Okay. Okay. For everybody who doesn't know, my name's Sue Miller, and my husband Scott, and Dr. Cynthia McKenney, who also go to Westmont, and then two of our friends who aren't here, Yvonne Dorman and Sherry Herzog. We all went to Egypt in October. And so we have been asked to present, well, Egypt and Jordan. And so we've been asked to present a slideshow of, what we did and some of the highlights and that sort of thing. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Next slide. And I'm going to probably be sitting back here because my notes are on this computer. Okay, so this gives you an idea. We went up for 2 weeks, and we landed in Cairo. And went from Cairo on hang on just a second. Went from Cairo on a night train down to Asswan. Let's see. And then we took a Faluca back up to Luxor, and then a bus to Luxor, and then we flew back to Cairo, and then we flew over to Amman, and then we took a bus to Jeresh in the Dead Sea. And then we ended up on a boat down in Aqaba. So in 2 weeks, we did planes, trains, and automobiles. I mean, yeah, they ran us around. And all of this during COVID, when we really weren't sure, if they were even going to let us through the country. It was crazy. We were taking COVID tests constantly. But we made it. These are some of the places that we visited. When we were in Egypt, we landed in Cairo, and of course we did Giza, which is right there at Cairo. Then we went down to Asswan, and then to Luxor, which you may have heard of. That's where the Valley of the Tombs of Kings are. That's where Luxor and Carnac Temple are. And then we went over to Jordan. We did Amman. We did Jeresh, which I had no idea what a fabulous archaeological site that was. We went to Aqaba, Wadi Rum, which is the Red Desert in the southwest of Jordan. We went to Petra, of course, and to Carrick Castle, which is a Crusaders' castle built by the Normans. Next. So this is a picture. Of course, when you land in Cairo, the first thing you do is you go to the Egyptian Museum. Now, this is the Egyptian Museum on Tahrir Square. All right, this has been there since the early 1800s, and it's being replaced and renovated. A lot of the stuff is being moved to the GEM, which is the Grand Egyptian Museum. It's out in Giza. And so everything that's pharaonic is going to be in the Grand Egyptian Museum closer to the pyramids. This is the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities, and then they just opened the Egyptian Cultural Museum. At the beginning of the year, they moved all of the mummies out of this museum to the Egyptian Cultural Museum. This is the main hall on the right. And you can see there's a colossal statue of Amenhotep III and his wife T. In the center is some of the tiles from the Amarna period. I was in Egypt in 2010. I was in Egypt in October of 2010, which is right before the Arab Spring, right? The Arab uprising. During the Arab uprising, they did storm the Egyptian Museum. And they took 2 statues of King Tut, one of King Akhenaten. They destroyed 50 objects, which were in the main hall. Half of these objects have been recovered and restored and are on display in the museum. This is a close-up of that colossal statue down at the end, King Amenhotep. If you're not an Egyptologist, that means nothing to you, but King Amenhotep is the king if you're an Egyptologist, okay? He is like the sun king. Phenomenally wealthy, phenomenally influential as far as Egypt was concerned. He lived during the 18th dynasty. This is his queen T. Interestingly enough, in Egyptian, there is no name or word for queen, right? They make a big deal out of Hatshepsut going, oh, she acted like a pharaoh. Well, there's no title for queen. okay? Your relationship, your importance is your relationship to the king. So as a queen, she is Hemet Nesut Weret, which is the great king's wife, okay? So congratulations, you're the great king's wife. All right, so there's no name for queen. So Hatshepsut wasn't really being kingly, there wasn't a name for it. Interestingly enough, the Egyptians, there's just no change in their fashion style for about 4,000 years, okay? So one of the challenges for Egyptologists is to try and date some of these statues because you know what? They wore the same clothes for 4,000 years, all right? One of the precepts that we do know, these are some of their daughters, and we know that they're daughters, okay, because they're below their knee. All right, so if they're tiny people, they're shorter than your knee, they're actually children. Not children at that time, but they are your children. Okay, if they're taller than your knee but smaller than you, then they're people of lesser status, like maybe your vizier or your hairdresser, which is a big deal in Egypt, right? That was a title that they gave to people who had a lot of power. Next slide. So in the Egyptian Museum, there are all the stuff that you would expect. The static or the home display of Tutankhamun, you know, he's got the traveling display, but all of his goods are there except for the king himself. He resides in his tomb. Tutankhamun is the only mummy that still resides in his tomb because he was the only one found there, right? All of the rest of the mummies are now residing in the Egyptian Cultural Museum that we have found so far. But these are some of Tutankhamun's grave goods, and they probably look familiar to you. That bark on the right, that's what we call that big house, that bark, was not to house the sarcophagus of the king. That was actually to house the canopic jars. That's that alabaster box on the left. The canopic jars, there's 4 of them, and they hold your vital organs. And they're sacred, and they're protected. And so they've got 4 protection goddesses around there. This one is cool. She's Selket. She's not very well known. Selket, she's got a scorpion on her head, and she's one of the protection goddesses. That is the gold hammered over cedar. Tutankhamun, he picked 4 protection goddesses for his canopic jars. They are Isis, Nephthys, Neith, which is a very ancient goddess, and Selket, the scorpion goddess. Next. So, when they had a huge king's parade in Cairo to move, and it was awesome. They had these huge gold barks, and they moved all of the king's mummies out of the Egyptian Museum to the new museum, okay? And this occurred in April of 2021, so just recently. Well, it left big open areas. And so literally they brought in tons of sarcophagi that had been in storage forever. And so the second floor of the Egyptian Museum is just lined with cases of 18th and 19th dynasty sarcophagi. They're decorated and we'll be looking at them. But what you want to notice here, that's our friend Yvonne, there's nobody there. There's nobody there on the second floor of the Egyptian Museum. Okay, when I was there, in 2010, I mean, it was 5 people deep and really, really packed. Very, very hot, very, very packed. Because of COVID, COVID was difficult to travel, certainly, but we had unprecedented access because the Egyptian economy is well over 90% based on tourism, and they were locked down during COVID. And so they were like, you want to see this? Sure. They were like, sure, anything you want to see. You want to see the back rooms? Okay. So this is another picture of the second floor of the Egyptian Museum, and there on the right are some of the cases with these mummies in them, and you can see the detail of them. And what you want to take away from that is just basically that not only the pharaohs had really, really intricate burials. Now, on the left is an Ushabti. Now, an Ushabti is somebody that you have in your tomb because, in the afterlife, which is supposed to be pretty much like this, okay? Because if you're rich, you want it to be just the same as this, right? So the afterlife is going to be just the same as this. You got to have servants because somebody might ask you to do something, and heaven forbid you should have to do a chore in the afterlife, right? So you have to have Ushabti. And so you have to have an Ushabti for every day of the year because somebody might ask you to do something at any time, right? So there's 365, except that it's exactly like the world here. And you get some Shabti around, they start lazing around, so you got to have foremen or overseers. So for every 10 Ushabti that you have got to have a foreman, okay, to make sure that they answer when they're called and that they actually do the work. So again, you won't be called to do any work. All right, so if you're a pharaoh, you're going to have 401 Ushabti in your tomb. And here's just, this shows you kind of this is 19th dynasty. This is a nobleman. Or I'm sorry, this is a royal mummy, and you can tell that because of the location of the hands. Those hands are holding the crook and flail, and of course only royalty would be doing that. But you can see how it's shelled, like a Matryoshka doll. It's one coffin within another coffin within another coffin. We saw this with Tut, right? He had the 3 gold coffins, but it's pretty cool. The next slide. Now, in addition to having, just the really cool coffins on the second floor, they have a whole section on Akhenaten. Now, Akhenaten is the monotheistic rebel ruler of the 18th dynasty. He was the son of Amenhotep III, our sun king. All right. Apparently, he grew up spoiled because he became a rebel, and he changed his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten. And he decided to do away with the worship of Amun, and worship only one aspect of the god Ra, which is the Aten, which is the noonday sun. Okay. Now Ra, it really, hours lectured on their theology. It makes no sense whatsoever. But Ra had a lot of variations, right? There's actually a litany of Ra, which is 157 known variations of Ra. Okay, but the big ones are Keper in the morning, right? He rises as a beetle, and then the Aten at noonday, and then either the old Ra is a little guy, or he's like the ram-headed Ra at night when he's tired. So Akhenaten was not monotheistic, okay? During his reign, all the other gods, except Amun, were worshipped freely. But he himself only worshipped the Aten. Now, everybody else could be blessed through him. Okay, so it wasn't like the Aten was putting down rays of sunlight on the king, which he shared with you all. All right, so it's not exactly what we consider monotheism, but that's what he's known for. On the right-hand side is a really shocking thing. This is the defaced sarcophagus of Akhenaten. Now, after he ruled, we went back to the old gods, right? We went back to Amun. The fact this exists at all is shocking. It was found in a tomb unrelated in KV 55 in the Valley of the Kings. You can see that the face has been chopped off, the gold has been done away with and stuff. The peacock feathering, that gold inlaid with lapis lazuli and coral, is typical of the Amarna period, and you probably recognize it from King Tut's, right? His gold coffin is done like that, because Tut is quite probably a son of Akhenaten. All right, so on the left-hand side there, you see the inside of one of those Matryoshka doll coffins, and you see, it's painted really. Now, the body, the mummy, would be laid in there, so he could literally see this stuff. And what you're going to hear about is that this is a cheat sheet for the afterlife. So, like, if you're confronted by a demon in the afterlife, you need to know his name to, get out of trouble or to get through the gate or to get wherever you need to go. So, all the information you need, all right, to get to heaven is on the inside of your coffin, because you'll be able to see it, right? So there's gods doing ablutions and people doing sacrifices and stuff, but it's pretty cool. In the center is a basalt, and this is very typical. They're all over the Egyptian Museum. That's Menkaure. He's the third pharaoh to build a pyramid at Giza, and then he's got a gnome goddess on his left, and then Hathor, the cow-headed goddess, on the right. On the right-hand side is Hatshepsut. She's the female who ruled as a pharaoh. And then Cairo itself is just gorgeous. We went down to the old city, and that's in the center. You'll see a gate to the old fort at Cairo. Cairo is over 21 million people. okay, in 2021. And every day about 7 million come in from the Delta to work in Cairo. So they come south from Alexandria and stuff. So it is a very, very busy place. It's called the City of 1,000 Minarets, and there are a lot of minarets there. Remember, Egypt is a Muslim country. The call to worship is melodic. It's not like in some Muslim countries. It's like a sing-song. It's very pleasant, I found. Let's see. So after Cairo, we went down to the Giza Plateau. Now, the Giza Plateau is about an hour southwest of Cairo, and it contains the 3 big pyramids and, of course, the Sphinx. On the right-hand side, you see there the original entrance to the Great Pyramid. It's not the one that you use right now to enter into it. Cheops, or Khufu, built the Great Pyramid about 2589 BC. He also dug, it was easy to dig there. He also dug trenches for his solar boats. And then Menkaure, the statue we just saw, came along and built a slightly less huge pyramid, but it's on higher ground, so it looks bigger, right? So he wanted to do deference to Khufu, but he wanted to be taller. Okay, so he built his pyramid there, and then finally Khafre built his pyramid there. Let's see, there's a bunch of mastabas. The queens have mastabas, and the queens also have pyramids. There's 6 other small pyramids on the Giza Plateau. And that doesn't begin to give you an idea of how big the Great Pyramid is. It is phenomenal. It is dizzying when you walk up to the bottom and look up.
How tall is it? How many stories?
Okay, hang on just a second. I'll go back to my slide. I've got the next. You used to be able to climb on the Great Pyramid, and no longer. They no longer allow you to. Probably liability. Yeah, he's done it. Okay, so when you enter, and I'm going to have some more information about the Great Pyramid, all of the statistics are on a different slide, so we'll get to that. When you go in, what's called the Thieves Entrance, right? It's how they actually broke into the tomb, because they didn't know where it was covered up so perfectly, nobody knew. So when they actually broke into the tomb, it's much lower down. They had to, there we go. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide for you. I'm going, why is this not?
How far are you going?
Just to that one. Okay. When you enter in through the Thieves Entrance, well, they had to burrow through the actual pyramid stones over to the main hallway, okay, in order to ascend up to the King's Burial Chamber. So you have to climb through these little caves, in order to get over to the main shaft. Now, once you get over to the main shaft, you see on the right, it's not an easy climb. They've put on some handrails and stuff, but the stairs are pretty rough-hewn. And then on the left, you can see the actual Grand Gallery. Now, the Great Pyramid of Khufu was built in 2589 out of limestone. There are 2,300,000 limestone blocks. The average weighs 2.5 tons, or 5,000 pounds. The height of the pyramid is 482 feet. So that's pretty tall. It's the largest and the oldest of the pyramids in Giza. The base of the pyramid covers 13 acres. Yeah, you start walking around it and you just give up. It's just, it's so far.
So one of the big things that they mentioned was about that they were not slaves, that they used to be the farmers.
Yes. Okay, so Scott's bringing up a really important point. So back then, before the High Asswan Dam, the Nile would flood every year. Okay, it's called the inundation, and it's a whole season, right? So for 4 months, the Nile came up, it flooded the farmland, and then slowly receded. Okay, after that there was planting, and after that there was harvest. So there are 3 seasons. The Akhet season, the flood season, if you're a farmer, you're out of luck. There's no jobs, there's no work, right? The craftsmen, the artisans have their jobs, but if you're a farmer, you don't have anything to do. So what the pyramids were work projects for the farmers. Literally, and it was good work. Now, there's a possibility of being injured, okay, but if you were injured, you were buried in a private tomb, not a mass grave, on the Giza Plateau by your pharaoh. So that's like very big for just a common man, okay? So they did not use slaves to build the Great Pyramid. We know this because there's not a lot of inscriptions in the Great Pyramid, but what there are is some graffiti. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but above that corbelled ceiling, they couldn't hold it up, right? They had to have stress-relieving chambers up there. And the guys building it, because they built it and covered it up, they'd just put some graffiti on the blocks, right? And they'd say, hey, the drunkards of Menkaure are here, you know? And this is what they called them. They were that's actually an inscription in the Great Pyramid, right? They were very tribal, okay? Very into their gangs. And that's what they were called, right? They were called gangs. When we saw that statue of Menkaure earlier, and she had the goddess of the bat gnome, okay? So like you would have like Lubbock, okay, would be a gnome, okay? And we'd have our own goddess. And you would be called up to battle with people from Lubbock, and you would go into battle with people from Lubbock. You would do great works, like work on the pyramid with your brothers and your sisters and everybody from Lubbock, right? And they were very tribal that way. So they had great tribal names, though. They've uncovered some really cool diaries and things like that. And like I said, the drunkards of Menkaure, you know, and it's pretty cool. Let's see. The base of the pyramid covers 13 acres. The grand gallery, which is that walkway, is 127 feet long. Seemed longer. It was very hot. It's 28 feet high, and it extends at 27 degrees angle. So they have built a ramp, and they've put boards across that so you have a foothold. But a 26-degree angle is pretty steep, okay? And you climb up that to the king's chamber. Okay, now it wasn't all fun and games. So this is Scott being photobombed, coming through, so climbing through one of the tunnels to get there. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a little bit more of how the structure of the Grand Gallery was formed. None of this is put together with glue or stakes or spikes or anything like that. The rock, it's just rock on rock. All right. So the Great Sphinx was carved about 2500 BC, and that's by Khafre. It is part of his mortuary complex. So he built the second largest pyramid. And interestingly enough, Khufu's pyramid, the first great pyramid, is the only one where there's a burial chamber inside the pyramid itself. After that, they went back to burying them in subterranean chambers. So both Khafre and Menkaure were buried underneath their pyramids. And I went down into Khafre's pyramid the first time I was in Egypt. And it was like Scott's walking through the tunnel there for a really long way. It was like your back and your legs and everything hurt by the time you got down to a burial chamber, and then you get to climb out. So there's the Sphinx, and that was part of his mortuary temple. The Sphinx is actually carved. It is not built. And if you look at it now, it looks like, okay, those blocks or like bricks or something. Those were repairs done in ancient times because it's right at the edge of the Giza pyramid, right? And so the tectonic plates and the seismic activity takes a bigger toll on that than it does on the pyramids. So it's right at the edge of the bedrock, and parts of the Sphinx have been deteriorating since, over time, because it is a seismic area. And so those are ancient repairs. It makes it look like it's built out of bricks, but in fact, it's carved. Right there in the center is like my favorite photo ever. On the left is our guide when we were in Egypt, and on the right is Zahi Hawass. And Zahi Hawass, you've probably seen him if you've watched anything about Egypt. Okay, he is an Egyptologist, and he goes on all the programs, and does the Discovery Channel and stuff. When I was there like 10 years ago, the Egyptologists, they didn't like Zahi Hawass. They didn't like everything being popularized so much, So, but he was the head of the antiquities, the Minister of Antiquities for 2 sessions. He went and defended the Cairo Museum during the uprising. And he is probably solely responsible for the fact that the Cairo Museum was not totally sacked, because people have such respect for him. So hats off. He is leading expeditions now. He's leading excavations. Again, he's no longer the Minister of Antiquities. On the right-hand side, you can see that it's sealed off there, where the dream stela is. This is Right here, this is the dream stela. And I'll just tell you really, really quick. Two sons of a king were both up for kinghood, and they were fighting. You know, they had the political things going on and stuff. And one of them, who was not the favorite, okay, went to the Sphinx, fell asleep underneath the Sphinx, had a dream, went back and told everybody that if he just cleared away the sand from the Sphinx, that he would be king. And he cleared away the sand from the Sphinx, and he became king over his much more favored brother. So that's the dream stela that he put up there, explaining what had gone on. And that is sealed off to the public right now. The next one. After Giza, and we were pretty exhausted, we took the overnight train to Asswan. And you can see there, that picture on the right is just to show you what we were eating. It was a lot of carbs. It is not a wealthy country, and I have to say Egypt is poorer now than when I went there before the Arab Spring. The Muslim Brotherhood did not do Egypt any favors. But they're coming back. They've got a president now who is really, really building and making, doing infrastructure, investing in roads, investing in water, investing in electricity. But they are a poor country, and they gave us a lot of carbs to eat. But we didn't mind, and it was a fun trip down to Asswan. Asswan is really a long way, all the way down the whole length of Egypt, basically. Here, when we got to Asswan, is the famous Cataract Hotel, which you may know from, that's where Agatha Christie stayed when she wrote Death on the Nile. That in the foreground is a Faluca, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit. Asswan is known for its perfume and also for its spices. And we visited, this is a spice shop that we just loved, and it was just off the bazaar, and this guy was awesome, and we brought back a bunch of spices. So while in Asswan, we took a boat ride over to the temple of Isis at Philae. This is a later temple. This was built during the Ptolemaic period. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, and then he died in 320 BC, okay, all of his generals split up his land, right? Ptolemy was a Greek general who stole Alexander's body and ran off to Egypt with it, okay, because whoever's got the body can't be attacked, right? It was a custom back then. So anyway, he got all of Egypt. So the Ptolemies, who ruled from 320 BC until 32 BC, when Cleopatra died, were Greek. So Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She was a Greek. This temple is dedicated to Isis and Osiris and Horus. The temple was built during Alexander's time. Basically, it's a Greek temple. The obelisks at the front of the temple. Oh, and I guess I don't have to get up. I've got this. Okay, there were obelisks here, and those now reside in a garden in Dorset, England. Egypt had a lot of obelisks. They put obelisks up for all sorts of things, and they tended to give them away as gifts to foreign dignitaries and as acts of goodwill and things like that. There are obelisks all over the world now, right? There's one in Piccadilly Circus. There's one in in Central Park. There's one, I don't remember. There's one in the Round in Rome. Yeah. Anyway, so those obelisks are no longer there. So this is the temple at Philae, and you can see it's beautiful where it's located, but it's not actually Philae anymore, okay? The temple of Isis was built on an island called Philae, and then they built the High Aswan Dam, right? They built the High Aswan Dam from 1960 to about 1970, and it flooded the area where the temple of Isis, okay, and Abu Simbel and a bunch of other temples were going to be. So there's water now between the High Aswan Dam and the old British dam. So UNESCO and the Egyptian government moved the temple of Isis to Agilka, which is a new island, but it's still called the Philae Temple, even though it's not on Philae anymore, because Philae is about 30 feet underwater. But it is a beautiful location. And you can see here, this is just, that's Hadrian's, that's a Roman chapel over there. This is just a bas relief from here, and there's Selket. She's the right eye of Ra. You can see she's got the Ra sun disk on her head and things. But it's very Greek in design, right? This is very very non-Egyptian look, and that's just because it's so late. It's about 37 AD. After that, we took a boat ride to the Nubian Village. On the right-hand side, you'll see one of the cataracts of the Nile. Now, the cataracts were where they could no longer navigate by boat, right? So you'd have to get out, move your boat, everybody take everything out, cross over, and then continue on your way. There are 5 cataracts before you get to where the Nile splits into the White Nile and the Blue Nile. Okay, so those were the 5 that the Egyptians were concerned with. The Nubian Village, it's a separate people, and they come from Nubia, right, which I always thought meant black, but in fact in ancient Egyptian it means gold. And they called them the Nubians because they came from the land of gold. This is where the Egyptians mined their gold. And the Nubians actually ruled Egypt during the 25th dynasty from 744 to 656 BC. And they're the so-called Black Pharaohs. And you can see there on the rock on the left, those are hieroglyphs that people did, you know, when they were waiting to ford their boat across the cataract. And the Nubian Village, you can see, is made of mud brick, and it was quite a maze. I would not have been able to get out of there. Okay, well, I mean, we just, okay, all over. And the women cook in the inside, in the kitchens downstairs, and they're so hot, and they are, of course, all covered, and God bless them. But all the entertaining is done up on the rooftops. So the rooftops are just lovely. And you just climb about 3 flights of steps, and then you've got the breeze, and you've got these little shacks on the top for everybody to eat and things. The next day, we went to Abu Simbel. Now, it was a long bus ride. It's 190 miles at about 50 miles an hour. It was killing us. So that was a long bus ride down to Abu Simbel. And Abu Simbel is now on the shores of Lake Nasser, which did not exist prior to the Asswan Dam. Okay? So it's very picturesque now. Instead of just being surrounded by sand, the temple is right there on the shores of the lake. That whole mountain on the left-hand side is man-made. They made the whole mountain, and part of it is hollow. They have light and engineering and all sorts of mechanical things within the mountain itself, but it was designed in order to take the 2 temples. And there's the iconic Abu Simbel. This is the main temple at Abu Simbel. These are 4 statues of Ramses II because he thought really high of himself. The temple is actually to a number of additional gods, one of them being Horus or Ra-Harakti, which is Ra of the rising sun. And he gets just a small little statue there in the center. But
what's the story on the one that's broken off? Is
that broke apparently very shortly after the temple was finished, during the 18th dynasty. Let's hope for the architects it was after Ramses passed away, although he lived a really long time, so I don't know. If that happened during his lifetime, it was not good for the architects. When they reconstructed Abu Simbel, the piece is down there, right? And it's whole. It's slid off. This is the piece. The whole head and the crown piece is right here. And the only piece that fell off was the crown. They thought about it. They said, hey, we're rebuilding the whole temple. Should we put this back up? And they said, no, it's been like this forever. We're going to leave it there. So they placed it back where it was. Right. So
They don't watch the movie Death on the Nile. This is the location that they're filming in the movie. But notice that also at the knees you've got children. This is one.
right. So Ramses he lived a really long time. We'll get into that, but he had a ton, I think 57 daughters. So you see a lot of them. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the main hall of Abu Simbel, and those are all statues of, guess who? Ramses II, yes. Okay, and I know, you wouldn't recognize it. If you look really carefully in here, you'll see, this is the Holy of Holies. You walk through all of this. There's seated gods in here. Okay, the temple was designed so that at the winter solstice and the summer solstice, the light shines in through this small entryway and illuminates 3 of the 4 gods in the Holy of Holies. And here is a picture of the Holy of Holies. On our right, we've got Horus, or Ra Harakadi. In the center, we've got Ramses himself, because in his deified state. Okay, this is Amun, right, creator of everything. And then over here in the dark is Ptah, and Ptah is a god of darkness, right? He's kind of the hidden one. And when they've got the beard on the pharaoh, that's the beard of Ptah. So the solstice light doesn't ever hit him. It hits only the other 3 gods. This is one of the antechambers. Now, the last time I was there, you wouldn't have been able to see it anyway, because there were so many people in the temple. I mean, you couldn't get that picture that you saw. We actually took that picture when we were there in the temple. There was nobody there, right? Now, people always get in the way of your camera and stuff, and there were people there, but I mean, this is amazing, right? The antechambers are all open now, and these are beautiful hieroglyphs. They're just beautiful. This was built off of the temple because it was an acting temple, so they took in sacrifices and offerings to the gods, and they were stored here in the storehouse.
What's the floor? It almost looks like it was flooded.
It's wood. It's wood, and that's new since I was there also. It's stone, it's carved out of the temple, and I think they just had too many tourists tripping and wiping out and stuff like that, so they just put the smooth wood floor over the base wood. This is the second temple. This is to Ramses II's Hemet Nesu Weret. Her name was Nefertari. She was one of 2 great wives, because Ramses didn't do anything not great, right? So he had 2 great wives, but she was his favorite for sure. And you can see amongst all of the statues of Ramses II, there's one of Nefertari. It's also a temple to Hathor, who was like the mother goddess. She was the cow-headed goddess, and you can see over there on the left, those little women icons on the columns. They've got cow ears, and that's supposed to be Hathor. That's how she was depicted a lot. Then we took a Faluca ride on the Nile. So this was an all-day ride, which was really great because it was super hot. We went in October, which is just the start of the tourist season, and I want to say it was like in the 90s, right? It was hot, but out on the Faluca on the Nile, it was lovely, and we sailed all day. Now, the Nile runs north, right? Out of its origins in Africa, it runs north to the Mediterranean Sea. Well, the trade winds, the breezes, come off the Mediterranean Sea always south. So you can always sail south, and you can always take the current north, right? So the Egyptians used the Nile to navigate up and down. I mean, they used it constantly. They never built roads. I mean, why, right? It was easier to ship things. But you can also sail with it, and we did. We sailed up north. And on the right, it's kind of out of focus, but you can see there's little donkeys and stuff, lots of cows. And there's a picture of the Faluca. It's a Latin rig, and they've been sailing Falucas on the Nile since about 4000 BC. It's a lovely way to get around. Yeah, exactly. They were scared of the Mediterranean. They called it the Big Green, right? They didn't go out on the Mediterranean unless they had to go to Lebanon to get wood. But they really, really didn't like ocean sailing at all. They were spoiled because they had the Nile, right? If you wanted to go north, you just stowed your sails and went with the current. And you wanted to go south, you lifted your sails and it went right down. So they never really became very good sailors. It's an interesting thing because Amenhotep, well, you got me started. Okay, Amenhotep at the end of the second intermediary period, he won it with a river battle, right? I mean, they were pulling boats up right next to each other and shooting each other with arrows. It was like really cool. All right, so this is the temple at Kamombo. Kamombo is a curve in the Nile, and there's sandbanks there, and they speculate that there were a lot of crocodiles there, and the crocodiles, of course, would eat children. They'd just come into town and snatch kids, right? So, I mean, they're hungry crocodiles. They're very mean. So they built a temple there to Sobek, the crocodile god. Not so much, it's like, the Egyptians were very into magic, right? And so like if you placated a god, they figured, okay, you know, we will bring you grain offerings and stuff, maybe you won't eat our kids, right? So this again is a late period temple. The Ptolemaic period or the Greek period, they were very efficient. This is a double temple. You can see there you've got 2 entry halls. It also has 2 hypostyle halls, 2 sanctuaries. This is for Sobek on one side and Horus on another. You know, why have 2 temples? You know, twice as many priests. Just put them both in the same one, right? So on the right-hand side is something that's really interesting and you'll find in every temple in Egypt, and that's called a Nilometer, right? When the Nile flooded at Akhet season, it wasn't consistent. Some years it was a great flood, and you know, of course it would cover more acreage and there would be more land to till, and sometimes it wasn't that great a flood and people would go hungry. So the amount of taxes that you owed to the temple was based on how high the Nile flooded. So each temple had a Nilometer, so you'd know exactly how much taxes you owed. And here's a picture of the god Sobek himself. And it's interesting to see now that scepter that he's holding, and there's everything means stuff, okay, in Egyptology, but that scepter is called a Wasp Scepter. And the head of the Wasp Scepter is actually Seth, okay? Seth is the god, he killed Osiris, and I mean, it's complex, but he's the god of chaos, all right? So when you hold a Wasp Scepter, you have not only power, because it's a scepter, but you have power over chaos. You bring order, okay? You bring Ma'at, which is order. So that's, yeah, so he's holding that. And so what that would mean is that Sobek would no longer just snatch children. Things wouldn't happen unpredictably, right? It's like, no, we have order now. We're making sacrifices to Sobek. He's no longer going to snatch children. It's all going to be normal, okay? And here you can see some of the mummified remains. These were sacred crocodiles, and they were kept in pits there. On the left-hand side, that mastaba, that bench-like funerary building, is for the crocodiles. Yeah? Okay, and in the center one, all of those jars, those are offerings because the crocodile has to eat in the afterlife, right? You know? So, yeah, there's a whole museum there for the crocodiles. And then finally, north of Kamombo, we made it to Karnak, the great temple of Karnak. Karnak, for 12 centuries, was the largest temple in the world. It started, let's see, it dates back to 2055 BC, and until Angkor Wat was built in the 12th century, Karnak Temple was the largest. So I misspoke. It's 31 centuries Karnak Temple was the largest until Angkor Wat was built in the 12th century in Cambodia. Karnak Temple is called Ipet Isu, the most select of places. It's on the east bank of Luxor. And it is for the gods Amun, his wife or consort Mut, or Mut, it depends on how you pronounce it, and their son Khonsu, who is the moon god. So there are precincts in the temple. Now, the reason that it's so large is because each pharaoh would come and he would make an addition to the Karnak temple, right? So it's like, you know, thank you, Amun, and he'd build a pylon. Pylons are what the Egyptians advertised, like, I did this. And it's a big wall. And you can see there's cut-ins, and that's where the cedar flagpoles would go. So you can imagine flags that go up way above the wall, and then it would all be covered with depictions of all the great things that the pharaoh did. And here's some just real quick pictures of Karnak. The hypostyle hall is famous at Karnak. It's 134 papyrus columns. It's 79 feet high. These are the tops of the columns for the Hipaa-style hall. Just recently, like 1940s, this was unveiled in the 60s. This is the red chapel of Hatshepsut. There was also a white chapel of Senuseret that were found, and they are phenomenally old. They're the oldest things. Well, the white chapel of Senuseret is the oldest thing at Karnak. How did it be preserved this long? Well, it's all about the magic, okay? The Egyptians believed that people who lived before them were closer to the gods. They had stronger magic. We've forgotten things, but we still do our magic, right? So if you could incorporate some of those old spells into your monuments, then it made it stronger. So it was not a bad thing to dissemble somebody else's temple and build it into your temple. And that's what happened with the red chapel of Hatshepsut and the white chapel of Senuseret. They were built into a pylon of Amenhotep III, and they were safe there until the 1800s when an earthquake broke the pylon down, and they found all these stones in there that didn't match. And then they reconstructed them very slowly. And in about the 1960s, they took place in the outside museum at Karnak. And this is just a temple of a statue of Ramses II and one of his daughters, and then the temple of Ramses III on the left. This is all within the temple. Now, these will be very familiar looking to you, the Sphinxes. Amun was the ram-headed god. And so at Karnak, the avenue of Sphinxes starts, they all have ram heads. These were actually built by King Ai. You probably haven't heard of him, but he was the vizier who took over when Tut died so young. Okay? So King Ai started the avenue of Sphinxes. Ramses II, never to be outdone, came along a couple generations later and added the little statues of himself in front of all the rams. They're in front. All of those little statues are Ramses II. He was very full of himself. Now, obelisks are everywhere in Egypt. We're not really sure how many obelisks were erected at Karnak. There are only 2 remaining. One was Hatshepsut's because it was sealed up by the people who came afterwards because they didn't want anybody to read her inscriptions, okay? And the other was her father, Thutmose I, and that is his obelisk there. We know from documentation that Thutmose III erected 7 obelisks at Karnak. Hatshepsut erected 4 obelisks. Thutmose I and II erected 2 apiece. And that's just the 18th dynasty kings, right? So we know that Karnak had a lot of obelisks. Only 2 remain. This is a close-up of some of the columns in the Hipaa-style hall. And this, I want to point out to you, these are hieroglyphs. And this is just basically he of the sedge and the bee, which is a title. The style is he of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, right? But not only do hieroglyphs have meanings, but they have actual sounds, right? And so I was talking to our guide, and I said, how would this be pronounced? And he said, Subi. And we have a friend here who tonight, Subir Dimple, and so she wasn't with us in Egypt, but she's on the temple at Karnak. So she's king of Upper and Lower Egypt. And on the left-hand column, you can see these are very, very deep carvings, and this is what Ramses II did. He went in and repurposed other people's artwork and other people's columns for himself, and he carved them really deep. But also so nobody could come in and do the same thing to him afterwards, right? On the left-hand side, you can see these columns. You see the paint there, right? It's 4,000 years old, and the paint is still there. That's why I said, don't get the hibiscus on you, because you'll never get that red out. Okay, so here are the pylons, and these are typical. It's on 2 axes, and I don't remember, there's 11 or 12 pylons. But we were able to talk to the guards, and they took us up into the pylons. They opened the gates and let us go up in there, because there just weren't any tourists there. Yes, yeah, notice the crowds. Okay, then we went on to the Valley of the Kings. Now, the Valley of the Tomb of Kings is where, Tut was buried, and it's where a lot of the royal burials are. The valley is on the temples are on the east bank of Luxor, and then the valley is on the west bank. So the dead are on the west side. The pyramid shape here. I think my light is going out. Oh, anyway, the valley, it's a wadi, right? It's an old riverbed or runoff bed, but it may have been chosen because of this. That's called the cairn, and it's a mountain that's at the head of the valley. But the pyramid shape was holy; it was sacred to them, and so they believe that they built the Valley of the Tombs of Kings there for that reason. Let's see. Go on to the next one. So what most people don't realize about these is they're not caves or caverns. They're like palaces that are underground. They're so big and they're so magnificent, and every part of them was plastered and painted and decorated. And some of the decorations were, because they're royal, okay, some of the decorations were about the king himself and how great he was and all the cool stuff he did and things. But a lot of it was, again, that cheat sheet to get into the afterlife. Here you can see, so we've got some of the books of the dead on the ceilings there. This is the Book of the Day and Night. On the right-hand side, we know that that's the 4th hour of the Amduat, Scott, because of the angle. You see that? So we'll talk a little bit about the books of the dead here in a minute. So on the left, these are typically ceiling paintings. You can see the sky goddess Nut. Okay, she's bent over the world. When she swallows the stars, it's day. When she swallows the sun, it's night. So this is the book of the day and the night. And that's typically done on ceilings, and you can see it there in the burial chamber. This is the book of the earth. The Book of the Dead is not one book. It's actually a collection of spells, and it changed over time. So it depended on the dynasty, it depended on the group of people that you were looking at. I've got a couple listed here. The pyramid text first started in the late 5th dynasty with the Pyramid of Unas, okay, and that's why it's very important. Up until that time, nobody was putting any inscriptions at all inside the pyramids, right? Then we had the coffin texts. And those are the ones that are inside your actual coffin. Okay, that started about 1900 BC, and that was called the Book of Two Ways. And then we started having the Book of the Gates, and the Book of Caverns, and the Book of the Sky, and the Book of Nut, and the Book of Day, and the Book of Night, and the Book of the Heavenly Cow, or Hathor. Then the Book of Going Forth by Day, which is the Papyrus of Ani, the Litany of Ra that I referred to, which is 157 forms of Ra, because you won't want to forget that one. The Book of Overthrowing Apophis, which was the bad snake that lives in the underworld, and then the Book of Proscriptions. So when somebody says the Book of the Dead, it's not one book. There's a whole bunch of different things going on. This is a typical scene from the Book of the Dead. This is Amun in his solar bark, and he has entered the underworld called the Amduat. So this is a scene from the Amduat. This is from the tomb of Ramses IV and V. This is the 2nd hour where Amun is on his solar bark, but he's not alone. He's with a bunch of other gods to help him out. Behind him is Horus. In front of him is Hathor. Those 2 snakes on the front are Mihan, the guardian snakes. In the underworld, you see a lot of snakes. You got to know who's good and who's bad. Pepe or Apophis is not a good one. This is a really beautiful tomb drawing, and it's very significant. I'll just show you why. When a pharaoh is alive, he is associated with Horus. Horus is the living god. And so they called Pharaoh, while he was alive, they called him the living Horus. This is Horus, okay, the falcon-headed god. So he is wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt and the white crown of Upper Egypt. So he's wearing the two crowns, and he's escorting the dead pharaoh, okay, to Osiris. When the pharaoh dies, he becomes Osiris. So he goes from being Horus, the living god, to the dead god. He becomes Osiris. And behind him is Osiris's wife, Isis, okay, Horus's mother. So is that messed up? Anyway, I think it's touching, right? So he's got his arm on him and he's escorting him here. He goes, this is going to be your future. This is who you are now. So after the Valley of the Tombs of Kings, we went south just a little bit to Deir al-Bahari, and that's the name of the site. There's 3 mortuary temples there. It's called the Northern Monastery, but the mortuary temples of Thutmose III, Montuhotep, one of my favorite guys, the second, and Hatshepsut. Now this is the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. It's very famous. It's called Djeser Djeserut, and it's the Holy of Holies. It took 15 years to complete. The architect was Senemet, which may have been her boyfriend. We don't know. It's speculated. Those are pictures of Hatshepsut at the top. So in the temple of Hatshepsut, she's got a temple to Amun, she's got a temple to Anubis, she's got walls depicting her escapades to Punt, which is, to get spices and stuff in the Middle East. And then on the left is the temple to Hathor. And you probably recognize her by now, right? Hathor with the cow ears on the colonnades. In the center is just a nobleman's tomb, right? It's in the rock face there, off to the right of Hatshepsut's tomb. But we know that Senemet, her architect, was buried in a tomb like this. That is the cairn, all right? They're on the other side from the Valley of the Tombs of Kings, and her tomb moved towards Deir al-Bahari, and so they speculate that they had planned on having their tombs meet. So Senemet could not be, he was not a king, he could not be buried in the Valley of the Kings, but they believed that they wanted those 2 tombs to meet. He may have overplayed his hand, though. He put his cartouche behind the door frame in the Temple of Amun, and it's speculated that Hatshepsut found out about that, and they may have broken up. In a life and death sort of way. Okay, so after we went to Deir al-Bahari, we went to the Colossus of Memnon. Now this is kind of sad, all right? The Colossus of Memnon are not Memnon. The Greeks tried to claim everything. They actually built, this is the Funerary Temple of Amenhotep III. I told you he was really the Sun King, okay? This was the largest mortuary temple that we know that was ever built. These colossus stood at the front. There were actually 3 sets of these. They are 60 feet tall. They are built from a solid block of sandstone apiece. They're 720 tons each. All right? So you can imagine. And what we believe, and well, they've done from the architects, there were 3 sets of these at each pylon going back. And what he did was he built this on the banks of the Nile so that, because he didn't have an ego or anything, but every year when the Nile would flood, the only thing that would be water all around, and there would be his mortuary temple, right? Like the Ben stone rising up out of the primordial waters, okay? It lasted less than 100 years because flooding your temple is not a good idea. Well, they had something, I can't remember, it's called some kind of copper, which is pretty tough, and it exists naturally, and so they were able to fabricate tools out of that. It's not soft like regular copper. I think it's diorite copper, right? And then they used grinding tools. Look up how they built the obelisks sometime. It's absolutely insane. Next, we went to Luxor Temple. So there's 2 temples on the east side of Luxor. One is Karnak Temple, which is absolutely huge, and then there's the Luxor Temple. It's called the Southern Sanctuary. It's Ipis Retsit. It's for the rejuvenation of the king. It's a much later temple. Started about 1400 BC. It's not nearly the size of Karnak. But what's really cool is, remember that Avenue of Sphinxes? It continues all the way to Luxor Temple. Now, when you get closer to Luxor Temple, it doesn't have the Amun head anymore, right? But it has like heads of different pharaohs. It has, let's see, different sphinxes. Yeah. But the Opet festival, which is one of the huge festivals every year, they would carry the barks of the gods. Okay, so like, remember the Tut's bark, that gold bark, the shrine? The god would be inside there, and they'd carry that, which must have weighed a ton, okay, down the Avenue of Sphinxes, which connected the two temples, and it would reside for about 6 weeks down at Luxor, and then it would return, okay? So, everybody could, see the god as they went by and things like that. When we were there, they were practicing for they were rejuvenating the Isle of the Sphinxes. They were rebuilding them and stuff, and they actually had the unveiling of the Isle of the Sphinxes in November after we left. And they are doing the Opet festival now, and it's all lit, and it was so cool. And we could see them practicing with their flags and stuff from our hotel room. It was so fun. So this is the main pylon. Oops, sorry. That's the main pylon. You can see that one of the obelisks is still there. There's an obelisk missing on the right-hand side. And then this is just the Cairo Bazaar, which was so cool. Just really, really cool. You can see the coffee urns and great coffee there. And the Cairo Bazaar, well, you can see the bazaar being there, but all of Cairo is like such a mix of modern and ancient. It's just crazy. The food is ancient. The way they prepare the food is ancient. And then it's like, get on a train. It's very interesting. All right, so we were done with Egypt. We were back in Cairo. We flew over to Amman, Jordan. Now, when we got to Jordan, and those arrows are going the wrong direction, but we took a bus to Jerash and the Dead Sea, and then down to Carrick, Petra, Wadi Rum, which is the Red Desert, Aqaba, and then back to Amman. So this is Jerash, which I knew nothing about, okay? This is a huge archaeological site. Apparently, people have been living there since the Neolithic period. And Jerash is built up above the town now because people have lived there for so long, they just kept building on the rubble, right? So 7500 BC. And this is, you enter Jerash through the Arch of Hadrian, and that was erected in 129 AD to commemorate Hadrian's visit to the location. This, down at the bottom center, you can see the Oval Plaza. It is the only Oval Plaza in a classical era city, okay? And it is in fabulous shape, and you can see the size of it. They have concerts there now. I mean, they use their architectural, it's so cool. On the right-hand side is the approach to the sanctuary of Zeus, and on the left you can see some of the stairs leading up to the sanctuary of Zeus. There were a lot of stairs in Jerash. We climbed a lot. In the center is one of the cardios, the Cardo Maximus, which is an avenue leading away from the oval center of town. It's a main road. On the left-hand side is one of the public water fountains. On the right-hand side is one of the vendors' booths. Jerash has a hippodrome, which we know seated about 15,000 people. It also has 2 theater complexes, and we were climbing around one of the theater complexes and leaving it, and you can run down to that green area and test and whisper, and people can hear you, and all of that stuff is really cool. But we were leaving one of those, and we heard bagpipes, and we're like, where are we? We're in Jordan, right? And so we ran out, and we ran over to the other theater where the Jordanian military was putting on a performance with bagpipes and drums. And they claim that bagpipes were originated in Jordan. I had never heard such a thing.
All 4 of them, the Jordanian army.
Yeah, that's the Jordanian army. They were super nice and very good. Then we went on to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is absolutely huge, okay? It's absolutely huge, and it's so beautiful because you're out in the middle of the desert, and it's gorgeous, okay? Nothing grows there. It's over 34% salinity. All right, so it's absolutely unpotable water. You can see Scott floating there in the center of the Dead Sea. And on the right is a natural stone. It is not salt, okay? But it's called Lot's wife, okay? And that actually comes from Genesis 19, where Lot's wife looked longingly over when she left Sodom and Gomorrah, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. And so, yes. That's right. So next we went on to Carrick Castle, and this was begun in the 1140s. It's one of the first castles built by the Franks, and it's notable for its Crusader architecture, which is the fortified walls, okay? I love that it was built by Pagan the Butler, okay? Pagan the Butler. He literally was the previous king's butler. Yep, and he built it, and he made it his castle in 1142. And it's because of its position east of the Dead Sea, he was able to control the Bedouin herds as well as the trade routes from Damascus to Egypt and Mecca. This castle was super cool, y'all. I mean, I can't begin to tell you. I had no idea. It was 3 stories high that we were just running around in it, and you can see there's like nobody there. It was really cool. And Saladin actually invaded and conquered the castle on his 3rd attempt. So it went back and forth, right, between the Crusaders controlled the castle, and then the Muslims controlled the castle, and then the Crusaders controlled the castle. And from time to time, they had 700 horses housed there, and then the Saladin would come in, and he'd have 1,100 horsemen there, you know, and it's a very large place. Let's see, the next one, and which I want you to see here, these were the ramparts we were running out on and stuff, but if you look down, you can see how really high this is. I mean, these are orchards down there. It was really high. Great place for a castle. Then we went on to Mount Nebo, and I know you all remember this is where Moses was granted his view of the Promised Land. Before his death in Deuteronomy 34. This has been a pilgrimage destination since the 4th century. The Church of St. George was built there, and it has, to commemorate Moses' death. The cross is stunning. There's a little person standing there, so you get an idea of how tall that cross is, and it's a sheer cliff on the other side. It's overlooking the Promised Land. It's just beautiful. So these mosaics were the actual floor of St. George's church there. And it was a pilgrimage destination. And these were actually discovered in the 1930s and partially excavated. And then they covered them back up to protect them because of the war. And so they covered them back up with dirt, and they were excavated from 1963 to 2007. And so now the mosaics are out. And the mosaics are really cool. You walk around on raised platforms so you can look down at the mosaics. And those are floors there, and you can get an idea there. And the reconstructed church of St. George is really cool. I mean, it was so beautiful. It's very peaceful, and they have gardens outside. Then we went on to Little Petra. Now, Little Petra is called the Cold Canyon, or the Sikh al-Barid by the Bedouins, right, because of the winds that blow down the canyon. Little Petra was actually where the Nabateans would come out to meet people on the Silk Road, because they didn't want to give away their actual location, Petra. So they built this. So anybody on the Silk Road, they would entertain them here, they would negotiate and trade with them here, and they would house them here in Little Petra. And they would go back and with tales of what Petra was like, never realizing that it was a number of valleys over where the Nabateans actually lived. And you get an idea, Little Petra is not little. It's very, very big. And there are Greek paintings on some of the ceilings that are the oldest example of Nabatean art. So then the next day we went on to actual Petra. And of course we had to do the touristy picture thing. So look at the walkway on the right. You walk for really a long time, okay? Depending on how fast you walk. But it was like 40 minutes through these carved canyons to get to Petra. And there you can see the very famous treasury, which is in the first valley as you get into Petra. What I didn't realize about Petra was how enormous the site is. I mean, you wear yourself out, which is why we're on camels, okay? You wear yourself out walking and climbing and things. Now, you can always climb. There's paths that lead up behind these carvings and things, and these were carved out of the live rock. These are not built. But there's a temple to Zeus. There's a number of temples. There's a lot of nobility's tombs and that sort of thing. But the city is vast. They had everything. There's a place called the monastery. It was not a monastery. It was a place of high sacrifice. But it goes on for miles. And there's Sherry Herzog, who is one of our members, and there's Cynthia behind them. And they were riding donkeys. And these are the 850 steps up to the monastery. And the Bedouin traders, they set up their tents and everything. Huh? Mules? They don't look like mules. Their ears aren't that long. They were mules. They set up their tents right on the path. So you have to walk through their tents going up to the monastery. Donkeys and all. Everybody, yeah. And you can see the donkey is walking there. It's coming out of a little close-cut cave. Then we went on to Wadi Rum. Now, Wadi Rum is the Great Red Desert. They filmed The Martian there, if you've seen that movie, okay, without any filters or anything. I mean, it's red. And it's in the southwestern part of Jordan. And we stayed at a Bedouin camp. Now, this Bedouin was very ingenious. I mean, he saves his money. It was a tent camp, and we expected a tent camp. And we got there, and look, there's buildings. He has to compete for tourism, so during COVID, he decided he got all of his clan, and they built all these buildings. And they're charming, they're lovely, beautiful little apartments, you know, with showers, and it's really nice. And I'm like, okay, we were gonna stay in a tent, you know? It's pretty nice. We did sleep out around the fire, just to sleep in the desert. Yeah. And then, of course, you eat under the tent. And that was our four-wheel. That little Toyota was our four-wheeler to go out into the sands of Wadi Rum. I was a little worried. I thought we were going to get caught or stuck. We didn't. We didn't get stuck. And we came to another Bedouin camp out in the desert. And this gentleman played and sang for us and served us tea and smoked a ton of cigarettes and tried to sell us anything that we wanted, you know, coal for your eyes, that sort of thing. Small children, that's right. There's our tour guide is at one of the local wells. Wadi Rum is home to the Zalabiya tribe of Bedouins. They're very welcoming. They're very gentle. They raise camels, and they treat their camels really, really well. You'll see some here in a little bit. So we drove all over and climbed all over the rocks. There's rock formations everywhere. It's just beautiful. And of course, it's very popular with rock climbers. And then this is what the desert is known for. It's called the Valley of the Moon. The mists come into the desert at sunset. And there's our luminaries at our camp. So the next morning, before sunrise, it was still quite dark, we got up and we got introduced to our camels, and we went out because we wanted to watch the sunrise above the desert. And these camels are raised by the local Bedouins, and they are not like commercial camels. They are very friendly. They kept running up next to the camel next to them so that you could pat their head, you know, while you went along.
Commercial camels are not like that. The camels at Petra were not like that. They didn't want you to touch them. They didn't want to be around you. But these are more like pets. They raise racing camels, this tribe of Bedouins, but they assured us that we were not on racing camels. They're like, no, these are not racing camels. But they were super sweet. And after Wadi Rum, we continued on down to Aqaba. Now, Aqaba is in the Gulf of Aqaba, where Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and the Saudi Arabia meet. This is on the east side of the Sinai and the Suez Canal, and the Red Sea, which connects the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, is on the west side of the Sinai. So this is what they believe was the land of Punt that Hatshepsut sent her expeditions to bring back the spices and things.
Is that where the guys building the Saudi Arabian guys want to build a big city right down there?
Dubai?
No, down there, want to build it.
We'll talk afterwards. So Aqaba is the only coastal city in Jordan, which is shocking, and it's a resort town. And it really has that whole resort vibe, right? I mean, there were no surfboard shops, but you felt like there should be surfboard shops there, you know? I mean, there's places where you could get towels for a dime, you know, dry off and stuff like that. It was super cool. They've established economic development zones along the coasts, and many foreign corporations are investing and developing resorts there. And the Red Sea is fabulous. We went snorkeling, and there was all sorts of great fish. It was really fun. And then Amman itself, we returned to Amman, has the citadel. That's the fingers of Hercules, the statue over there on the left. That's all that's left of poor Hercules. That's from the Roman period. The center is something, I did not go to this museum. Cynthia went to this one, and this is actually a clay pot burial, okay? So they would put the bodies in the clay pots. They did everything in clay pots in Jordan, okay? I mean, they would cook your dinner in a clay pot, knock the top off the clay pot, break it, dump your dinner out. I mean, they make clay pots for absolutely everything in Jordan. So apparently they bury people in them as well. And on the right is the moon unit. I don't know what you call that thing. It's a rover that was used in the movie The Martian, out on the Wadi Rum. It was gifted. That is the Royal Automobile Museum in Amman. And then there is upside down and what it's supposed to look like. It was a big deal when they unveiled that. It was like, oh, and that's the end. And then this is I think there's one more slide. Yeah, so this was just personally Set. Remember I told you about the Wasp Scepter, okay? And he's the Set animal. It's a compilation of a bunch of animals. It's like an anteater. Well, it's not. Anubis is the jackal, but you'll see Set is a bad guy. Okay, he's a bad guy. He kills Osiris. He tries to steal Horus's throne. Okay, he's the god of chaos and stuff, but he's got like square ears. And he's got like an aardvark or an anteater's nose. And so to see him in temples, okay, but you don't see him in tombs very often, right? There was a pharaoh, I started researching this, there was a pharaoh really early on in the old dynasty and stuff. Things were going very bad for Egypt at that point, and he decided, okay, well, chuck it in. He'd been a Horus king, and he changed his name to worship Set instead. And I'm like, that's going over to the dark side, right? Okay. And so I said, well, why? Okay, Seti the First, one of the tombs we went into, right? Why did they start naming kings after Set in the 18th dynasty? Were things really bad? Okay, well, no. Theologically, there is a reunification. Horus and Seth bury the hatchet by about the 18th dynasty. They've been warring for about 4,000 years. They decide, okay, you killed my dad, I forgive you, we're all good. So in the 18th dynasty, you start seeing stuff like this. This is the reunification of Horus and Seth. So here's Set, here's Horus, Okay, sworn enemies for life. They're working together, digging a well, you know. So it's very, I think the evolution of Egyptian thought is very, very interesting to me. There's three large origin stories, and everybody's good with that, right? It's like nobody's like, well, that doesn't make any sense because that person did that. And it's like, they didn't care. They were all good with it. It's like, get along. So that's it, everybody. Does anybody have any questions?
I just think artistically, it's kind of fun to know that the pharaohs in the beginning, all the artists worked for the pharaohs, and when you see that broad shoulder from the front and the profile of the face, that was dictated. That style was dictated by the pharaohs.
It was dictated. Yep.
So it's cool to see.
It is interesting, though, because they had, okay, so you can see these are from thousands of years apart, and you can see that the depictions are very similar, right? But you go into some tombs, like, it wasn't open this time, but we went into Thutmose III's tomb, and it was very modern, okay? So, like, instead of a regular tomb, the walls were plastered white, and then over it, like a scroll, like a papyrus was rolled, and all the walls were yellow, and they curled at the ends, and all of the stuff was like somebody did hieratic writing, okay? So the Amduat and everything, and it's all like shorthand writing and things. Very modern, very earth-breaking. Yeah. Any other questions? You want to go?
Very, very interesting.
Well, thanks, everybody.